Hi guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. McLaren have confirmed that the Papaya Rules that started here in 2024 will end here in 2024 as well, and Oscar Piastri, if the situation necessitates, will be sacrificed for the better good of Lando Norris and his championship challenge against Max Verstappen. Is this too little, too late in terms of that championship challenge? Is it the correct decision, given that arguably they need Lando to do better to earn the right to a situation like this? Or is it the right move because Max Verstappen feels like it doesn't matter what goes on over there? The reality is that Red Bull have to fix their car if he has any chance of holding on to this dub. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Few big updates on Formula 1 around the world today. Arvid Lindblad, who's had a very promising junior career so far, certainly in Formula 3 this season with Red Bull. He's going to be joining F2 next year with Campos. So definitely a driver to watch. I mean, Red Bull have so many drivers, as we all know, in their junior program, that there's always a question as to which ones are actually going to make it and which ones aren't, right? Because, you know, Isaac Hadjar right now is in a pretty promising position, but it definitely feels like his time in, well, the team might not necessarily go too much longer unless he can get a seat quite quickly somewhere on the senior side, and there's only so many seats available, and probably Liam Lawson's getting one of them. So always tricky, but Lindblad is definitely a driver to watch over the next couple of years. Bottas himself said he expects to stay on the grid, but it's not so clear actually that's going to be true, because apparently his chances of signing the extension with Sauber are rather shrinking, given that Bortoletto's on the radar. But, you know, Bottas deserves a drive, I'm going to keep saying it. Ollie Behrman, though, is getting a drive next year at Haas, and we know that when he raced in Saudi Arabia, he was hardly ready for Formula 1, right? His neck was all over the place. There were some great comparison videos, actually, watching Sector 1, Charles Leclerc versus Ollie Behrman on, like, lap 56 or whatever, when Behrman's head was just, you know, battering around there in the cockpit just because his neck could not cope with the G-forces. Baku isn't as bad anyway on that side as a track like Jeddah is, but even then, in terms of race fitness, he should be more prepared now than he was previously. So we'll see how he gets on this time out. Definitely two tricky tracks to drive as your first two tracks in Formula 1. They have changed the track again, basically back to how it was in 2022. If you guys remember, I'm pretty sure last year they reduced the length of the DRS straight. This year they've said, all right, we're going to add it 100 meters longer again. So we saw this in Monza. Did it help overtaking into turn one? I mean, it obviously helps, right? Having more DRS for the car behind doesn't make a massive difference. There's a question on that. It's probably a good change given the increased dirty air that we currently have here in Formula 1. And like in Monza, of course, it's a track with very, very low downforce. The DRS doesn't do that much. Baku, they like running lower downforce if they can because it's mega straight, but they can't run low downforce because there's a lot of twisty sections as well. So maybe medium to low, and that will mean that the DRS will have some degree of effectiveness, of course. Let's talk about the Newey stuff, because there was an article today from Formula Uno kind of discussing why the breakdown in the relationship between Ferrari and Newey happened, because this seems like, back at the end of May, basically a done deal, and apparently this was very near going to be happening. So Adrian Newey seriously considered apparently three options: either a return to Williams, which would have been fascinating, joining Ferrari alongside Hamilton and Leclerc, or taking part in Stroll's ambitious project to revive the Aston Martin brand. Initially, Newey didn't consider the Aston Martin offer because there were rumours that Newey wasn't happy with the idea that Lawrence Stroll might just like sell the team at one point, and basically they were, you know, Newey never said this publicly, but there were rumours that Newey wasn't happy with the idea that Stroll might just sell the team and use his own acquisition, Newey's acquisition, as reasons to bolster the value of the team. And clearly a conversation was had, if we believe that to be true at least, that settled the mind of Newey that no, Stroll isn't just going to sell up and get out of here. He is here for the long haul in terms of getting the team to where it needs to be. The role that he was offered at Ferrari would have been a super consultant role, which is what he was looking at the time, and that meant that he didn't necessarily have to be there in Italy all of the time, which is pretty critical for him. And apparently in early May, this agreement was nearly done, but never quite finalised. They presented a solid financial offer, but Aston Martin, of course, went one step further, offering him shareholdings in the team, which is always a difficult thing to decline. And then Newey had some sort of a perspective shift when he realised that, you know what, in order to get the team to where he wants them to be, he will want to take on a full-time role. I think that was a realization, according to this article that Newey had, that he feels like, okay, wherever he goes, he does need to be full-time in order to have the best possible kind of allocation of resources to ensure the team is going to work in a way that he believes is going to be able to win them championships. And for Ferrari, if he's going to work there full-time, that means living in Italy, which, didn't seem worthwhile, right? The Aston Martin offer just made a bit more sense on all fronts, and I think that's why we find ourselves in the position that we do. And of course, with Aston Martin signing Newey, that raised the question, as we saw yesterday, what about Max Verstappen? And could that potentially happen sooner rather than later? Mike Crack, the team principal, actually made it very clear today what Aston Martin's stance is, and he says the door for Max Verstappen is always open for every team. Now, you might debate that, because even if Max was available, I don't see Ferrari or, maybe even, maybe Mercedes would, maybe even McLaren, I don't know. But I think Ferrari are going to be happy with Hamilton and Leclerc. Every other team, if Max is on the market, they're going to go for him. And Aston Martin, he is making very clear and no exception. And Max was asked on these rumours today, and he says, oh, well, happy for Adrian. I texted him, I said, good luck in the next adventure. And Max did not deny today in the press conferences that he would at least be considering an opportunity if one was to potentially arise, which it may well do at some point or another. Mike Crack, by the way, he was talking about Fernando Alonso and his absolute intention to get Newey into the team. He even said that he'd take a pay cut to make it happen, 10%, 20%, whatever the number is. Like, deduct some money from my salary, give it to Adrian, because look, at this point for Alonso, the money doesn't mean that much. What he wants is a championship-winning car. So, Alonso is obviously buzzing with the situation. He also was asked, okay, are you going to be around after 2026? Because he's contracted for that first year with Newey, effectively. After that, who knows? But he says, yeah, after 2026, I'll be driving. And after that, I'll still be driving. Now, he doesn't say driving what. So it may not be Formula 1 at that point, right? That's the other advantage that Aston have. And that's also the other thing that I think Mike Crack said on, I think this quote went a little bit longer actually, and he basically says, across the board, right? So the theory would go that, look, hey Max, come and join us for Formula 1, and if you want to go and race in World Endurance, we've got the Aston Martin Valkyrie project there as well. So that's one of the other reasons why this is a pretty compelling offer. But let's talk about Papaya Rules and what is currently going on at McLaren, because last weekend there was a good argument to say they should have made some sort of changes. I mean, Monza at least. I made the point that I don't think they should have allowed, or at least should have talked about the possibility of going for the move that Oscar did into turn 3, into the Roger chicane. Phenomenal move for sure, but it did cost Lando second in the end, which was critical in terms of the race. And at the end of the Grand Prix, you could have argued they could have swapped the drivers to guarantee more points for Lando in the Championship Challenge. These are currently the standings in Formula 1. Max Verstappen leads the way with 303. Lando Norris is currently 62 points behind, and Oscar Piastri is a further 44 behind that. So realistically, Oscar's not in the race, and even if you imagine that, let's say Lando DNFs and then Oscar wins a Grand Prix, then you might say, oh, well, maybe Oscar's in it. But at that point, the title's probably over, right? Because Max will probably pick up a few more points, and there's not that many races to go, and that is what it is. So these are the current standings. Leclerc is honestly still, I wouldn't say he's in the mix, really, but he does find himself in a great enough position that the Constructors' title fight is still potentially on for Ferrari. But, for McLaren now for some time, it's really been Lando leading the way, and he's led the way in the vast majority of qualifying sessions, the vast majority of race sessions against Oscar, and Oscar's very good, don't get me wrong, but and maybe in the future Piastri will be better than Norris. I mean, it's possible. There's been rumours even today. Will Buxton said that there's a feeling inside McLaren that maybe Oscar's ceiling is higher than Lando's, and you can argue that, right? I mean, I think Oscar has the mentality of a champion for sure. Does he quite have, the race pace and the management and these sort of factors yet? No, but we'll see where it goes. Lando's the stronger driver for now, absolutely. And, you can argue, has he earned the right to be their number one driver? Probably yes, but should he have executed better? Also definitely yes. So it's a difficult one for McLaren. But we talked about this just after Monza, that they said McLaren they were going to look into it, they were going to review exactly what their situation is, whether they have a number one driver or whether they don't. And Zach Brown yesterday commented on it and said, we're going to give everything we've got. They've come to the decision that, okay, yes, they want to win the Constructors, which they're probably going to win anyway, and that is, for the teams, the fundamental goal. The teams want to win the Constructors over the drivers. All of the fans don't really care about the Constructors, right? It's all about the drivers. And, in Formula 1 history, nobody really remembers who won the Constructors in 2008. People know that Hamilton won the drivers' title, right? Maybe people do remember because of Spygate and, it going to Ferrari and all this, but realistically, people care about the drivers, and that's what Zak Brown says. Oscar is going to do everything he can to help. They're both awesome, but Lando is now in a position where he can mathematically see it. Now, that's been the case for some time, right? It's not like that changed in Monza radically, but maybe what did change is the realization for McLaren that this fight is legitimately on, because the Red Bull is clearly not anywhere near where it was. I mean, a few rounds ago, the Red Bull and McLaren were pretty close. It seemed like in performance, certainly in Max Verstappen's hands. The last couple of rounds, that's not been true. So it felt to me that, let's say 3 or 4 rounds ago, McLaren didn't even see the drivers as possible. But, even in Hungary, right, I think many of us thought that it was possible, and that's why I wouldn't say I was massively surprised by McLaren's decision to allow Oscar back through to beat Lando at the end of the race. And look, Lando was the faster driver. Yes, he bottled the start, but he was the faster driver on that final stint by a comfortable margin. Oscar couldn't catch him up, of course. And yes, they wanted to give Piastri his first win. But even then, I think the team should have realised this fight was potentially on, and now it's several rounds later, and they're finally realising this fight is on, and it might end up being too late. I genuinely think the most likely outcome of this title fight is a very marginal Verstappen win, and I feel like in hindsight that may come to cost McLaren, but who knows? What if McLaren dominate and Lando wins everything and becomes a monster driver, and he's still got the pieces there. He's just executed not as well as he would like to have done. So this Papaya Rules that we heard all about during the Monza weekend, right? There was talk about that, and this is what Andrea Stella said. So clearly they went through what's happened in Monza and decided we cannot let that happen again. What we don't want to see anymore is a situation like in Monza where we enter the chicane P1, P2 and we exit P1, P3, because that is a detriment to the team. Team interests come first. These are the situations that above all we've got to fix, because as a matter of fact, the way we entered the race in Monza left the door open for this situation. So he's making it very clear that the conversations, which obviously we criticised here on the channel, that he had, or that the team had before the Monza Sunday, which I thought were pretty clear, right? It's like, look, guys, you're P1, P2 going into the Sunday race. If you can lead that through the first couple of corners, great. And if you're 1-2 again coming into the Curva Grande going down to the Roger chicane, just hold stations, right? No funny business, no dramas. Let's just hold the P1, P2. One take the inside, one take the outside, and don't go for anything crazy. Those comments clearly weren't said, and therefore Oscar was well within his rights to make the monster move that he did. But now obviously they're coming to a different realization. So Andrea Stella says we will bias our support to Lando, but we want to do it without too much compromise. So on our principles are that the team's interest always comes first. We want to be fair to both drivers, and that's what kind of they went on to say, that Oscar is not necessarily going to, in all circumstances, guaranteed, whatever happens, going to give up the place to Lando. It depends on a number of considerations, but the question was put, according to a BBC interview with Andrea Stella, to Oscar Piastri and said, hey, when I said to Oscar, would you be available to give up a victory? He said, yes, it's painful, but if it's the right thing to do for what the team wants to achieve, which is both championships, then he will do it. So it seems like whatever may or may not be in the contract with Oscar Piastri, what Mark Webber may or may not have implied behind the scenes, McLaren are now admitting, look, if we find ourselves in a 1-2 position and Oscar's in the lead for whatever reason, they will have the balls, apparently McLaren, to say, look, we're going to swap those drivers around. We need Lando to get those extra 7 points, which of course could be absolutely massive in the context of a World Championship fight. We already know that to be true because, if he'd gained a couple of 7 points earlier in the season, the championship fight would be more on than it already seems right now. So it's a difficult one for Stella and for the team, and certainly for Oscar. And Oscar was asked to comment and he says, look, being selfish, I'd prefer not to do this, obviously, but it's not just about me. Any earlier in the season it would have been probably excessive, but I think now is an appropriate time. So the fans may think differently. I'm sure there's lots of Lando fans, lots of McLaren fans that say, well, they could have done this a few rounds ago, but they had to maybe learn the lesson the hard way on some respects, and they will learn it in a really hard way if they end this season with only 1 championship. Unlikely they're going to have 0, but it is possible if maybe Ferrari makes some big progress or Red Bull bounce back to some degree. And if Red Bull bounce back, then, there's no way that Lando's winning this championship. But Lando says lots of people think team orders are simple. They're not. Oscar's fighting for his own championship, and his own career. So it depends what positions we're fighting for, but we have a good plan. So apparently McLaren have spent the last couple of weeks, and fair play to them, having a good conversation on this to understand, okay, what circumstances would we deem this to be appropriate? What circumstances would we not? And, what situations would we potentially bias our support to Lando? And of course, that also implies pit stops as well. I mean, it seems pretty unlikely that they're going to be undercutting one of their drivers with another to favour Oscar, right? If they're going to do that, it'll be to favour Lando, right? Basically what they did in Hungary, undercutting Oscar to allow Lando to the lead, that's the type of thing they'll be doing now, but deliberately so, and, not asking Lando to give the place back effectively. So, as Lando says, if he's deserving of a win, he deserves to win. But if, Oscar's P1 and Lando's P2, 2 seconds down the road, and it's a clear 1-2, that's when a difficult moment will be had. But Oscar has said that he's willing to do it for the betterment of the team. So, and Piastri says it doesn't always mean that we're going to change the situation, but it's obviously a possibility at that. So, very much intrigued to your thoughts and all of this stuff in the comment section below. Just one final thing then, response to this really, from Max Verstappen, because, of course, he's looking at it thinking, oh, can he believe it, right? McLaren have finally come to their senses here, and they are going to give Norris the priority. And he says, of course they're going to do what they want. It's not my problem. I have my own problems at the moment. If you look at it from Oscar's perspective, he is closer to Lando than Lando is to me, which is true. But as I say, in terms of a championship context, it doesn't really tell the whole picture, does it? Because as we looked at a few minutes ago, Oscar can't really win this championship. It's obviously mathematically possible, but realistically it's highly, highly unlikely. Lando is the only McLaren driver really in the conversation here. So, he's earned that in the sense that, look, he's scored 10 podiums to Oscar's 5, 2 wins to Oscar's 1. Maybe it could have been 0. Obviously, you can debate on that in the comments below. Well, we did a couple of months ago, to be fair, so no need to go into it again. But, and there's also the argument to say that, well, Max, if he was in this year's McLaren, would have far more than 2 wins, which I certainly believe is true as well. But look, Max is going to say, oh, Oscar, don't listen to McLaren. What are they talking about? You've got your own fight. You didn't join to be a number 2 driver. That's actually what Max says. They're not far apart in the championship. Oscar came in as basically a first driver, and I don't think he's the type to be labelled a second driver either. So, it seems like Max is kind of saying to McLaren or saying to Oscar, like, hey, yeah, McLaren and Zach Brown and Stella, they might have come to this decision, but, look in the mirror, Oscar, right? You're a number 1 driver. Feel free to go around the outside of Lando again into the Roger chicane. That would help out my championship fight. But, very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.